weather ultimately develops in your particular area. Now, before we talk about fronts, cold and warm, let's talk a little bit about air masses, because simply what a front is, it's a transition zone. It's a separation zone between two different air masses. And typically, between cold and warm air, we'll find this front or transition zone. As we come west of this particular cold front, we find a large area of cold, dry air, which has settled into the country from Canada. To talk more about these high-pressure systems which come in behind the cold fronts, here's Charlie Welch.
Meteorologists identify high-pressure areas on a weather map by using observations obtained from weather stations across the country. One of the first steps in analyzing a map of observation data is to draw isobars on it. Iso means equal, bar for barometric pressure. It's a lot like playing connect the dots. The lines connect observation of equal barometric pressure. The pattern that emerges shows a kind of topographic map of the atmosphere. On this map, the isobars encircle three areas of high pressure. What is a high-pressure system? Air masses that get their physical properties from the land or water they were born over. If air sets over very cold terrain, it cools, compresses, and sinks. It will pile up until acted upon by forces of nature. It starts to move. Imagine we're riding a gust of wind down this mass of air. If the Earth did not rotate, then we would slide down the dome like water running down a hill. But our planet does rotate, so a gust of wind is deflected to the right of the downward path. Because of the Earth's rotation, wind from a high-pressure system is turned in a clockwise direction. The weather associated with a high-pressure system is usually nice and sunny.
Now, with the help of Charlie, we've determined that there are highs and lows that develop in the atmosphere. And in a situation like this, the battle between this very mild air that we've colored in or shaded in red, representing a mild air mass or a mild dome of high pressure, compared to that one that's sitting on the upper left-hand portion of your screen, a cold high pressure. That's where we come into the word fronts, because it's a battle between the warm and the cold, or the high, and right along that front, a ripple of low pressure developing along that frontal boundary, and that's where we get the battle going on, right along the front. The front representing the battle between the cold and the warm air mass. And what you see in this particular setup is the warm air usually, I say usually because there are exceptions to the rule, usually advancing from the south and headed northward from the equators towards the pole. You'll find the warm air, and that's where you find the leading edge of that transition, the warm front. And then when you find the cold air, again, usually coming down from the north from the polar regions and working towards the equator, you find the cold air surging southward, and that's where you find the leading edge of the cold front. And again, the winds, as we look at this a little bit closer, you'll find the southerly winds in this case, as if we were in the northern hemisphere. You'll find easterly winds ahead of the warm front, and usually north to northwest winds behind the cold front. That's just a general rule of thumb that you can apply as you're trying to make your own forecast. In fact, we're going to find out a little bit more about forecasting, a little bit more about fronts with this.
If you've ever watched the weather on TV, you've probably seen one of these, a weather map. These symbols are called fronts. Fronts form when warm air meets cool air. One air mass struggles to overtake the other. It's like a battle going on in the sky. Here's how it works. The blue soldier is cold air. The red soldier is warm air. When they fight along the front, this usually means bad weather. If the cold air wins by pushing the warm air back, you have a cold front. But if the cold air retreats as the warm air advances, you have a warm front. If neither air mass can win, the front is stationary. In spring and summer, fronts sometimes can bring rain, strong thunderstorms, and even tornadoes. In winter, depending on where you live, fronts can bring snow. If it's raining or snowing where you are, it usually means there's a front close by. I'm Marny Stanier, the Weather Channel.
Well, if we were to take a slice of the atmosphere through the cold front, a cross-section of the cold front, this is what we would find, and it's actually quite different than that of a warm front. In a cold front, you tend to find a very steep slope in the atmosphere, the cold air. In other words, as you come up from the ground and heading up into a higher altitude in the atmosphere, you notice the slope of this cold front. Very effective at working into the warm air. Now what happens is the cold air is denser, it's heavier, hugs the ground, and it's almost like a bulldozer. It pushes on through this warm air. The warm air being lighter is lifted very rapidly, and if you have enough moisture, this doesn't always happen, but if you do have enough moisture in the air, then very soon after the warm air rises, you'll start to see a condensation process occur. In other words, the clouds form, and eventually we'll get some rain. In a very strong cold front, of course, you can have heavy rain, thunderstorms, and if other ingredients are all together, perhaps severe thunderstorms spawning tornadoes. Just the opposite, the warm front. Now we're looking at a cross-section. Now the warm air being lighter has to go up over the cold air. Remember, the cold air being very dense hugs the ground, so the warm air is forced up along the top of the cold air, and typically along a warm front you can find a very long stretch of cloudiness before the rain actually moves in. Warm fronts, cold fronts, a forecast. Let's look at some weather maps.
This is a rare sight here at the Weather Channel, a blank map of the United States. Normally a weather map is full of symbols, but what do they all represent? A cold front is marked by a blue line with triangular points on it. The front heralds the arrival of colder, drier air. A warm front is depicted by a red line with semicircles. This means warmer or more humid air surges in after the warm front passes. An occluded front is when a cold front overtakes a warm front and is shown as a purple line with both points and semicircles. An L shows the center of low pressure, while an H depicts high pressure. The thin light gray lines surrounding the highs and lows are isobars, or lines of equal barometric pressure. When the lines are very close together, strong winds usually result, as in the case here in the Great Lakes area. Rain is represented by green on the map. The darker the shade, the heavier the rain. Snow is shown as white, while sleet or freezing rain is orange. Last but not least is yellow, which depicts fog. All of these elements come together so the weather can be interpreted easily. I'm Dennis Smith, the Weather Channel.